Wiedergänger, Creepypasta, on the 7th night after the funeral. The knocking came back to the old house, 2 short, 1 long, the same rhythm Oma used all her life. Mara froze in the kitchen, her hands wet from washing the last dish. The water ran over her wrists and dripped to the floor. And in that quiet sound she heard another, the soft scrape of something heavy on the porch, as if wet shoes slid a little before they stopped. She did not go to the door. She remembered the rules her grandmother taught her when she was a child. Rules that sounded like fairy tales then, but now felt like locks on a thin door. After a funeral, Oma used to say, "You cover the mirrors, you draw a line of salt at every threshold, and if someone knocks after dark in a familiar way, you do not answer. A name is a handle. Do not give your name to the night." Mara had covered the mirrors with black cloth. She had poured the salt. She had not, however, kept from answering the knock on the first night, because grief makes simple rules feel cruel. She had whispered, "Who is it?" And there had been no voice, only that slow scrape and the smell of damp earth leaking through the doorframe. She had not opened the door that first night, or the second, or any night after, but every evening the knock came back, and each time it sounded a little clearer, a little more like Oma's old cane tapping the wood. Tonight, the sound was sharper. The 2 short knocks were quick, polite. The long knock lingered like a question. Mara dried her hands and stood very still. Thunder rolled over the hills. The old house, set at the edge of the village, answered with a tired groan. There were wet footprints leading to her porch every morning now. They started nowhere, not at the road, not at the gate, just a few steps in the grass, and then dark wet marks on the wooden stairs, small like Oma's feet, toe prints slightly turned inwards the way she used to walk. Mara told herself she would move back to the city next week, when the papers were finished and the bank sorted the account. But each day the village held her a little more. The rooms smelled like rosemary, like tea, like the lemon soap Oma loved. Every corner remembered her. In the pantry there was a notepad with a list in her grandmother's thin handwriting. Mend the blue scarf, feed the cat, write to Lenny was the sister Oma had not spoken to in 20 years. They had argued, and the argument had become the last thing between them. "A name is a handle," Oma had said. "I threw away a handle I should have kept." Mara looked at that list every morning and did nothing, because grief takes all the strength out of your hands. But on the 7th night, when the knock came, she picked up a thick candle and went to the door. She did not open it. She pressed her ear to the wood. 2 short, she whispered, 1 long. The knocks came again, gentle. She could smell damp earth and salt water, though the village was far from the sea. She slid the chain on the door and lifted the latch halfway, so the door opened an inch and the chain held. A sliver of cold air touched her cheek, and the candle flame bent toward it. "Mara," said a voice through the door, soft as fabric being folded. It was not quite Oma's. It was low and careful, like a person trying out language after a long silence. "Child." Mara's heart stepped sideways in her chest. She shut the door fast and the chain rattled. She remembered the rules, the most important one. Do not answer if it uses your name first. A name is a handle. Do not give your name to the night. She went back to the kitchen, put the candle on the table, and made tea with hands that shook. The cat, a thin, grey thing that had adopted the house after the funeral, raised its head from the chair and hissed at the door. Its fur stood up in a ridge from neck to tail. It did not look at Mara. It stared past her, at the black cloth covering the mirror on the wall, and hissed again, lower. This is silly, Mara told herself. There are raccoons. There are boys from the village playing a joke. She wanted her voice to sound normal. It did not. It sounded like a voice standing in a church. She sat. She drank tea that had no taste. The knocking came again, 2 short, 1 long. Then a pause. Then the scrape of the cane on wood, the slow slide. As if the person who held it were remembering how to stand, thunder moved away. The rain lightened. The house grew still, and then, very softly, a spoon moved by itself on the counter and settled against the teacup the way Oma used to set it down, careful not to chip the porcelain. The cat leaped from the chair, darted out of the room, and hid under the bed. Mara did not sleep that night. She waited, and when the grey of morning came, she went outside. The porch was wet. The footprints were clear. They came to the door and stopped. There were 3 long strands of white hair caught under the edge of the mat. They were Oma's. Length and colour, but when Mara picked them up, they fell apart in her fingers like old spider silk. At noon, she took the notepad from the pantry and sat at the table. She took a pen. Her hand hovered. She wrote to Lenny. "Dear Aunt," she began, though she had never met the woman. "Oma wanted to write to you. I think she waited too long. I think she wanted to say she was sorry. She wrote more. She kept it simple. She told the truth. When she finished, she folded the paper, put it in an envelope, and wrote an address she found in a drawer. She set the letter by the door to mail it in the morning. That night, the knocking returned. 2 short, 1 long, then a new sound, paper. Sliding on wood, Mara stood very still. She picked up the candle and went to the door. She did not open it. She looked down. The letter she had written sat on the floor inside the house, in front of the door where she had left it, but now there was a second letter beside it, folded the same way, in the same kind of envelope, with the same address, but the handwriting was not hers. It was thin and careful. It was Oma's. Mara dropped to her knees. Her breath went cold. She turned the second envelope over and saw the back had been sealed with a small smear of something that looked like ash. "Don't open it," she told herself. "Don't look for answers in the dark." She opened it. Inside was a single page. The writing was small and even. It said, "I am sorry for the weight I gave to silence. I am sorry for every year that hardened between us. I cannot cross the last door while this door stays shut. Please, Lenny, please set my name down somewhere warm. Please say it like you once did, the old way. Annalise, Annalise." Oma's name in full. A name is a handle. A name is also a key. Mara put the letter down. Her hands shook more than before. She felt a strong urge to say the name out loud, to say it into the night and make the night answer. She put a hand over her mouth. The knock came again. 2 short, 1 long. Then, very softly, almost like a child, the voice through the door said, "Please." The voice was closer to human now. It sounded like it had learned something new since last night. It waited. Then it tried another word, the one it had used before. "Child." Mara did not speak. She went to the kitchen and opened the jar of salt. She poured a new line across the base of the door. She took the bell string from where it hung and tied it to the latch so that if it lifted, the bells would ring and warn her. She sat awake in a chair by the door, the candle guttering. She listened to the house breathe. Once she dozed. Once she woke to the sound of humming. It was the melody Oma used to hum while watering the garden, a three-note tune that never went anywhere. The humming came from behind the black cloth where the mirror hung. Mara gripped the arms of the chair. The humming continued, then stopped, as if the singer were listening for something in return. When morning came, the letters were still there. Mara took both to the post office. The clerk looked at the handwriting on each and said, without thinking, "You copied her hand very well." "I didn't," Mara said. "At least, I don't think I did." The clerk did not answer. He weighed the letters, stamped them, and slid them into the dark mouth of the outgoing bin. "Storm tonight," he said. "Don't leave your windows open." That evening, Mara cooked a soup, the simple kind, potatoes and onions and rosemary. She put a little bowl of it on the porch, the way her grandmother had always put a saucer of milk on the first night of winter, for whoever has to walk far. When she closed the door, the bell string trembled. The soup cooled untouched. Then, as Mara watched through the window, a spoon rose up out of an empty place, dipped into the bowl, and set itself down. The spoon left a wet half-moon on the wood. "Please," said the voice through the door, clearer now. "Say the name." Mara answered without thinking, and her voice was a whisper, but it was still a voice. "I will when Aunt Lenny does." Silence. Then, "Please," again, and then a long scrape of the cane on wood. A scrape that moved across the porch to the far corner where Oma used to sit and watch the rain slide off the roof. The storm rose in the night. Windows shook, the bells trembled. The cat hid under the bed. At 3:13, the bells sounded in a pattern that was not human. A little stutter, like laughter cut into metal. The latch lifted on its own and pressed against the chain. The chain held. The room grew very cold. The candle went out. Mara stood in the dark and said, "No," and hoped that word would be enough. Something leaned close to the door and spoke in a new voice. It was not quite Omar's anymore. It was not quite anyone's. It had both age and youth in it, both gravel. "And honey," it said, softly, carefully, as if choosing tools, "Mara." She did not answer. "Mara," it said again, and the sound of the name was stronger, like a handle being gripped. She pressed her back to the door and pressed her palms against the wood. The cold came through her skin and sat inside her bones. From outside came the smell of damp earth and rosemary and lemon soap. From inside came the sound of the mirror humming again under its cloth. The voice said her name a third time. The bells shivered. The chain held. But when a name is said 3 times by the night, a door can open even if the lock stays shut. It does not open in the wood. It opens in the person. Mara felt something take a step forward inside her chest, something that was not her, but knew how to be her. It breathed in time with her. It tilted her head the way she tilted it when she was listening for birds. It found the shape of her hands on the wood and matched them. "I will carry it for you," the voice said, and now it was so close it might as well have been her own mouth saying it against the door. The heavy, the list, the long winter. "I will carry it. Let me in." In the kitchen, the notepad turned a page by itself. The pen rolled. A new list began to write, and this time the handwriting was not Omar's. It was Mara's. Call the bank, sell the house, stay in the village, be the one who remembers. The last line wrote itself slowly, with care. Say my name. Mara tore the black cloth from the mirror and looked into the glass because she needed to see her own face to feel like herself. But the mirror did not show her face. It showed the door from the porch side, as if the mirror were a window opening outward. In the reflection, rain fell in straight lines. and a small old woman stood with a cane. Her hair was wet and flat to her head. Her eyes were not lit. They were deep and calm like dark bowls. When she smiled, the skin at the corners of her mouth did not move the right way. Beside the old woman stood another figure, almost transparent, as if it had just learned how to stand. It had Mara's shape. It held her breath and let it out as fog in the rain. It looked at the door like a person looking through glass at a warm room. Mara stepped back. The mirror showed her stepping forward, pressing her hands to the wood from the other side. The old woman lifted the cane and tapped the door, two short, one long. The figure that looked like Mara copied the rhythm with bare knuckles. The knocks came into the room at the same moment as they sounded in the glass, and the bells sang. "I will carry it," said the voice. "You can rest." "What happens if I rest?" Mara asked, and now her voice sounded like it came from the mirror, and the voice outside the door sounded like her. "You go walking," said the voice. "You walk the path, you know. It is simple. Simple is kind." It was a kind offer. That was the worst part. It sounded like help. Mara looked at the notepad, at the handwriting that was hers, but not from her hand. She thought of the list in the pantry, the one with the last task right to Lenny. She had mailed the letters. It was done. Maybe this was how the story finished. Maybe a person who loved you could come back to hold your weight for a while so you could sleep. She picked up the jar of salt and poured a new line across the door. The salt darkened at once, as if it had absorbed a shadow. The bells crawled in a small circle and hung still. "Please," said the voice, and now it sounded tired. "Say my name." Mara closed her eyes and thought of the little, ordinary kindnesses. The warm pan of bread on Sunday. The way Oma cut apples in a spiral and fed the peel to the birds. The three-note hum that never went anywhere. A name is a handle. A name is also a key. Keys open and close. She took a deep breath, and in the quiet she heard a far sound, a phone ringing in some other house. A woman answering, a voice speaking a name the old way, with love. "Annalise," said Mara, but she did not say it to the door. She said it to the mirror. She said it to the version of herself that was learning to stand in the rain. "Annalise," she said again and again, and the word felt like setting something down in a warm place. The old woman in the mirror closed her eyes. The dark bowls, of them filled with light, and then the light folded like napkins and went out. The cane fell through her hand and hit the porch with a soft, final sound. The figure with Mara's shape looked at the door. It lifted its hand to knock. It hesitated, like a person deciding if a journey is worth the path. It looked into the room, and for a moment its face matched Mara's exactly. Every scar and freckle and line, as if it had practiced and perfected. Then it smiled her smile, the one she did not know she had when she smelled rosemary, and shook its head once. It turned away. It walked out into the rain. In the room, the bells were quiet. The salt line looked white again. The cat came out from under the bed and rubbed itself against Mara's ankle like nothing had happened. The house sighed the way old houses do when a pressure changes. Mara stood in front of the mirror and saw only her own tired face, her own wet eyes, her own breath clouding the glass. She put the cloth back over it and tied it at the corners. She did not move to the city the next week. She stayed through the winter and then the spring, because simple can be kind. She mended the blue scarf. She fed the cat. She waited for a letter from Aunt Lenny, and when it came, it was short and warm and included a photo of two girls under a pear tree, one labelled Lenny one labeled Annalise, and on the back a line that said, "I said her name out loud at breakfast." I think she heard. The porch stayed quiet most nights. But sometimes, at the edge of sleep, Mara would hear it. Two short, one long, from some house far away, from some door that was not a door made of wood. She would hold her breath and keep still. She would not answer. The sound would pass like rain dot, and once, months later, in a storm that came down hard and cold, she woke to a new sound. The knocking was soft, almost shy, two short, one long, but it did not come from the door. It came from inside the walls, from the place where the old pipes ran, from a hidden corner of plaster where the notepad hung. The bell string trembled without moving. The cat looked at that wall and hissed, just once. Mara lit a candle and held it high and said, in a voice that was simple and firm and hers, "No, not my name." The house was quiet again. The candle burned down. She sat in the chair until morning, listening to the kind of silence that is full of good weight. When the light came, there were no footprints. The mirror was still covered. The list in the pantry had one last line added in thin, careful handwriting, Omer's, now gentle as steam. "Thank you," child Mara smiled at that. She made tea. She opened the door to the day and did not look for any marks on the porch, because sometimes you do not need proof to know that something heavy has been set down. But as she stepped outside, her foot came down on a wet shape that dried at once a half-moon from a spoon, and then the sun caught the place where it had been and made it shine for a second. And in that second Mara understood the last of the rules that were not written on any list. A name is a handle. A door is both ways. And if you hold yourself by your own name and keep your door simple and warm, sometimes the night will walk on without needing to come in.